As we journey through this time leading up to the season of Lent, I'm reminding you that your Lenten practices will focus on the things you do during the week, the things that you add to your disciplines, the things maybe you subtract from your life as a form of discipline. I hope you're thinking creatively about that. Some people have thought about doing a social media fast during the season of Lent. And that can be really hard to do if that's a lifeline for you. Other people are thinking about maybe taking certain times of the day when you don't expose yourself to screen time and limiting that. That can be another way of subtracting something that's good for you. What are you going to add? Are there some things that you can add to your observances during the season of Lent that will be beneficial for you? Let me suggest one thing that we're going to perhaps help some of you with during the season of Lent, and that has to do with our observance of Holy Communion. And let me begin with a little trivia time. So, how often do Methodists take communion? How would you answer that question? You might think there's an obvious answer, but let me remind you, it's not so obvious. In my childhood, if you had asked me that question, I would have said once a month. We have communion on the first Sunday of the month, because that's how I was raised as a youngster in Texas in the Methodist Church. If you were to go back to, say, around the year 1800, and if you had found some Methodists living in the frontier of Virginia, you might ask them, how often do you take communion? They would answer, probably once every 3 months. What? Once every 3 months? That's because that's when the pastor came by. You see, they may have gathered every Sunday for prayer and Bible study, but pastors covered territory on horseback. And so you saved communion and baptisms for the time when the pastor came by. If you were to rewind the clock to early Methodists in England, what would they say? They would say, well, of course, you take communion every Sunday. That's what Sunday is for. And they didn't take it in the Methodist small group. They took it in the village church. The disciplines of the Methodists as they gathered during the week reminded them of the importance of going to communion at least once a week. And then if you had asked John Wesley that question, you might really be surprised, because he would say, as for me, I take communion about 4 times a week. Communion for John Wesley was the ordinary strengthening of feeding upon the presence of Jesus. And somehow, because of the changes of history, we kind of got away from that, and communion became extraordinary rather than ordinary. You see what happened. Let's go back to that 1800 again. Remember, living on the frontier, you had communion when the pastor came by. So Methodists got out of the habit of regular communion, not because it wasn't important, but because it was so very important that you were diligent to do that when the pastor was here. But something happened during that next generation when Methodists settled down, and all of a sudden they had a pastor every Sunday. They did not go back to the old ways. And so communion was still associated as an every so often observance. So this once a month kind of thing that we sort of think that's just the way it's always been is not the way that it has always been. Why am I bringing this up? Because one of the things that can enliven our observance of Lent is more frequent communion. And one of the ways we're going to be doing that during the season of Lent is to have an opportunity on Sunday afternoon for a brief communion service. We're calling it the 5:05 because it will start about 5:05 p.m. It will only last for about 30 minutes. And just maybe you can increase your frequency of communion. Maybe you can do that every Sunday afternoon, but if not, at least a few more times than you would ordinarily. We're going to be looking at ways to make this extra beneficial to people maybe that have a hard time with a full 1 hour Sunday morning sanctuary worship service. Some people are uncomfortable coming to the sanctuary because of maybe health issues or having to stand up and stretch or go out and leave, or maybe they have children or grandchildren with them and they're more concerned with having to herd the children. And so some people I'll just watch it online. And that's one thing you can't do, is take communion online. So I want to add this to your repertoire. We're going to try this for the season of Lent, see what happens, and maybe extend it beyond that. We'll just play it by ear. But for the season of Lent, on these Sundays, we'll be having 5:05 communion in the gym. We'll have some handouts for children so they can sit on the floor. They can go to another table. I know when we read in the book of Acts about God's people gathering together, I know the 5-year-olds in the book of Acts did not sit like this. I'm sure 5-year-olds in the book of Acts were squirmy like 5-year-olds are in the year 2025. So this is a judgment-free zone. So I'll warn you, if you like to pick on other people because of the way they're taking care of their kids, please don't come. Just don't come, okay? We don't want you there. If you're going to be looking at other people with an air of judgment, this is a judgment-free zone. But if you are a grace-filled person where you can bless other people and where you can be kind to other people, if you can jump that small bar, we'd love to see you. So at least once or twice, or maybe every Sunday during the season of Lent, come and join us and make frequent communion one of your ads during the season of Lent. There's one other opportunity, let me mention, and that is one of the denominations we are in full communion with is the Evangelical Lutheran Church. And the Lutheran Church, College Lutheran in Salem, has Wednesday communion at 12:15. Just about every week. And I've frequently been able to go over there and join that. And they would be delighted to welcome you. They have open communion with us. We are in full communion together. And this will be a blessing time too. So that's another way that you can share in more frequent communion. I'm going to be doing that myself because we believe that is where Jesus most fully represents himself to us, and we feed on his power and presence, and it's a wonderful way to raise our young saints in the feeding of God and help them to understand. Each week we're going to take like one verse, and we'll just talk a few minutes about that one verse. Maybe we'll sing a song, we'll take communion together, then we'll hang around for a little fellowship time. Kids can go out to the playground, we'll have a little popcorn. But 30 minutes from 5:05 to 5:35 is going to be our service time, maybe even shorter than that. This is not a lengthy, long thing, but it is another way to feed on the power and the presence of God. So remember, Lent starts on Ash Wednesday, the first Wednesday of March. And so the 5:05 will start on the second Sunday of March, which is indeed, let me do the math. Oh, yeah, that's right. That indeed will be the first Sunday of Lent. The second Sunday of March, the first Sunday of Lent. Catch the 5:05 and come join us in the gym and let others know about this. Maybe you know some folks that are having a hard time connecting to in-person worship. We want to make this as vital but as easy as possible. So keep that in your prayers. Maybe that can be part of your ads for this season of Lent.